Cornelius Vanderbilt is one of the richest people in history, with his wealth estimated to be more than $200 billion in current-day valuation at the time of his death in 1877. Historians believe that he owned more than 10% of all the total US currency in circulation at the time of his death. He was feared by most because of his unpolished and raw behavior, and no one dared to cross him because he was infamous for always ruthlessly settling the score. We will be uncovering one such story where his business partners colluded with the president of the country to betray him, and see how Vanderbilt extracted his revenge. He not only left his former business partners bankrupt, but also got the president impeached. But first, let's look at his rags to riches story and how he became the richest person on the planet at the time. Cornelius Vanderbilt was born on May 27, 1794 in Staten Island, New York. Cornelius's forefathers worked as servants, so he didn't have much to go on growing up as a little boy in New York. He didn't have a head for books either, and by the time he was 11 years old, Cornelius had dropped out of school to work with his father at the New York harbor. There, Cornelius watched with a keen eye as his father worked on a boat that transported goods and people from the harbor, and he quietly thought out a way to start a shipping company and thoroughly dominate it. Cornelius was just 15 years old, but he had the determination to make it big in life. But he needed some money to get started in the business in order to buy a ferry. Little Cornelius Vanderbilt hoped to secure a $100 loan from his mother, who was a farmer, with a small amount of savings. Surprisingly, she granted him the loan, but there was a catch. Cornelius had to clear a piece of rocky land for her, which he planned to farm. The work would have taken at least 10 men to finish on time, but Cornelius, eager and relentless, agreed to do it all by himself. Soon after he started the task, Cornelius realized that it would be impossible to finish the task on time if he did it alone. So little Cornelius rounded up a team of children and promised them a free ride on his boat if they participated in clearing the land, a deal they were only too willing to agree to. Cornelius successfully completed his mother's challenge, and in doing so showed her that he'd always use his street smarts to overcome any challenges that life throws at him. The young Vanderbilt collected the $100 and began his journey into the transportation business. With $100 in hand, Cornelius acquired his first boat, a Perry Auger. In 1810, Cornelius began transporting goods and passengers between Staten Island and Manhattan with the boat. Cornelius's plan was simple. He was well aware of the costs and margins in the ferry business. While working at the docks with his father, he had observed that most of the ferry owners were working with good margins and pocketing a hefty profit. He decided to undercut his competitors to make his ferry more popular and make sure that they would make the most trips at maximum capacity, even though it meant that he'd make a comparatively smaller amount than his competitors. In the meantime, he didn't upgrade his lifestyle so that he could repay the $100 loan and then reinvest the remaining profits back into the business and expand his fleet of ferries. In 1813, Cornelius married his cousin, Sophia Johnson, and together they had 13 children and lived in a boarding house in Broad Street, Manhattan. It was a common practice back then in America where people would marry their cousins. However, Vanderbilt was so committed to his business that he would never have any time for his family. Watch later as we explore his troubled family life and how he would deal with the death of his children and the unstable mental condition of his wife because of years of neglect. In 1817, Thomas Gibbons, a steamboat owner, invited Vanderbilt to manage his line of steamboat between New Jersey and New York. Vanderbilt became Gibbons' business manager while handling his own companies. With his new job as Gibbons' manager, Cornelius learned the ins and outs of the steamboat business, which he had identified as the next big thing in the inland transport industry. He relocated to New Brunswick, New Jersey, a stop on the Gibbons line that ran from New York and Philadelphia with his family. There, his wife Sophia ran a very successful inn, utilizing the money earned to support their family's food, clothing, and education needs. At the time, Gibbons was battling a steamboat monopoly in the form of the New York waterways. The New York State Legislature had awarded the politically powerful Robert Livingston and steamboat designer Robert Fulton the sole rights to operate steamboats along those routes, which was stopping Gibson from operating in that area. Vanderbilt demonstrated his aptitude for the law by assisting Gibbons in meetings with attorneys. The monopoly was kept by Livingston's heirs, Even though both Livingston and Fulton had passed away by the time Vanderbilt began working for Gibbons, Aaron Ogden, Gibson's former business partner, had been permitted to operate a boat service between New York and New Jersey by the New York waterways. Ogden and Gibson had fallen out, and Gibbons started his own steamboat business to teach Ogden a lesson. Vanderbilt was instrumental in helping Gibson petition the Supreme Court and overturn the unlawful monopoly that was operating in the steamboat industry. Vanderbilt's undercutting strategy helped Gibson complete his revenge and drive Ogden out of business. I hope you're enjoying the video. Please subscribe to our channel, Business Absolute. Watch as we uncover why Vanderbilt went on to be known as the most ruthless businessman in history. Vanderbilt continued to work for Gibbons' son, William, after Thomas Gibbons passed away in 1826 until 1829. Even though Vanderbilt was working for Gibbon, he was basically his own boss, and in parallel, his own ferry business was thriving. In 1829, he decided to expand his ferry business by entering the steamboat business, which he knew well by now. He systematically planned his entry into the industry. He first purchased Gibbons Ferry to New Jersey. Then, in 1831, he bought his brother Jacob's line to Peekskill, New York on the lower Hudson River. However, he met a formidable competitor in the form of Daniel Drew, who also operated his steamboats along the Hudson River. Drew gave Vanderbilt a run for his money, and Vanderbilt decided to buy his company rather than engaging in a price war for a prolonged period. Impressed by his business acumen, they would form a secret alliance which would span over 3 decades. However, Drew would eventually betray Vanderbilt and would end up losing everything he owned. After this, there was no stopping the Commodore as he went on expanding his inland water business at a rapid pace. You might be thinking, how was he able to expand so fast? Vanderbilt stuck to his initial strategy of reinvesting all of the profits back into his business to expand his fleet and achieve economies of scale. He had a good understanding of human psychology. He dubbed his boat company the People's Line, stating that it was created by a commoner for the common man. His pricing strategy was consistent with his message, as he would make sure his fares were low, even if it meant he would make a smaller profit per passenger as compared to his competitors. He was thus able to undercut his competitors and appeal to the emotions of the common folk, who felt that the Commodore, who was one of them, cared for them. Cornelius was so successful that the bigger companies would often pay him off to leave the area when he ventured to a new line. One time, the Hudson Steamboat Association paid Cornelius $100,000 to leave the route between New York and Albany. You can guess what he did with that money. Bought more ships to make his fleet even larger. In the 1830s, many big businessmen in the steamboat industry were fondly called Commodore, which was the highest rank in the Navy at that point. But after his unparalleled success in the 1830s, there was just one person who would be remembered as the Commodore in the 1840s and later. Cornelius had a sharp eye for business, and he was greatly rewarded each time. Cornelius struck gold when the California gold rush began, but not in the way you'd expect. While most people began digging for gold, most times fruitlessly, Cornelius thought of a brilliant way to make as much money, if not more. People would need to travel to California, and he'd make his fleet the choice for the hordes of people looking to reach California from all parts of the country. The railways were not as developed in the mid-1800s, and ships were the most efficient way to reach the western coast from the eastern and southeastern part of the country. However, Cornelius was able to differentiate his services from his competitors by using street smarts. His competitors would use the established route via Panama to reach California. However, Cornelius found a route through Nicaragua that cut the trip by 600 miles. This meant his conservatively priced steamboats could transport people to California faster than any other line. What's more, the shrewd businessman bought exclusive rights to use the route by going into a strategic alliance with the government of Nicaragua. This meant that his competitors couldn't make the transit times or prices for the same journey, thereby making the Commodore's steamboats the preferred choice for the biggest migration in American history. However, it was this deal that would eventually show us the most ruthless side of the Commodore when his business partners betrayed him in the future. The betrayal started in 1855, when William Walker, an American military conqueror, took over Nicaragua through a military coup. He announced himself as the president of Nicaragua, which was a strategically important country because it was the major link between the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean before the Panama Canal was constructed in 1914. At the same time, Vanderbilt, who was a workaholic, had taken a much-needed vacation with his family and was in Europe. He had handed over the responsibilities of his business in Nicaragua to his minority partner, Cornelius K. Garrison. Garrison saw this as the perfect opportunity to cut Morgan out from his cash cow business and colluded with President Walker. The American president at the time, Franklin Pierce, had officially recognized Walker as the president of Nicaragua. Garrison formed a new company, and Walker transferred the exclusive rights for steamboat transportation to the newly formed company. Garrison then brought on Charles Morgan, one of Vanderbilt's associates from New York. After hearing what had transpired, Vanderbilt wrote Walker and Garrison a crisp letter making his intentions to retaliate clear. He wrote, "Gentlemen, you have undertaken to cheat me. I won't sue you, for the law is too slow. I will ruin you. Yours truly, Cornelius Vanderbilt." Vanderbilt didn't believe that revenge was a dish that is best served cold. He went on the offensive straight away. Vanderbilt was one of the richest people in the world by the 1850s, and he used his wealth to good use. He funded Nicaragua's neighboring countries like Costa Rica to overthrow Walker's government. In 1857, Vanderbilt, with his 4 allied Central American countries, tumbled Walker's government. Walker fled Nicaragua, leaving Garrison and Morrison to face Vanderbilt's wrath. Cornelius formed a new company and undercut Garrison and Morrison, even if it meant he would make a loss because he knew his pockets were deeper. He ran them into bankruptcy and completely destroyed those who had dared to cross him, like he had promised. This was not the first time that those who tried to betray the Commodore would pay a heavy price, and this certainly wouldn't be the last time. Watch later as we explore how his secret business ally, Daniel Drew, tried to conspire against Vanderbilt when they were working in the railroad industry. Vanderbilt invested in a lot of public railroad companies and acted as the president of the board of directors in the 1850s. He created the first publicly listed giant business in American history in the form of the New York Central and Hudson River Railroad by buying and merging the 2 individual companies. His strategy for dominance in the railroad industry was geared towards acquisition, consolidation, and expansion. The Erie Railroad was one company which caused a lot of headaches for Cornelius. His long-standing secret ally, Daniel Drew, was the treasurer of Erie Railway, and when Cornelius was trying to expand his railroad empire, he silently bought enough shares in the company to have control over the voting rights of the company. He allowed Drew to continue as treasurer on the board of directors because of his long-standing relationship with his former rival. However, Drew was not happy with the manner in which the Commodore seized control of the company and colluded with the other big boys of the railroad industry, Jay Gould and James Fisk. Drew got the 2 of them on the board and issued inflated stocks to water down the company shares. Vanderbilt, who was unaware of this fraudulent move, bought those stock to keep control of the company but made a loss of more than $7 million because of the inflated prices of the shares. After he learned of the betrayal, he confronted Gould and Drew and threatened to sue them. Afraid of what Vanderbilt might do because of his reputation for going to any extent to get his revenge, Gould gave in and returned the money Vanderbilt had lost. Vanderbilt handed over control of the company to Gould and focused on his other railroad companies. Gould and Vanderbilt never saw eye to eye after that and were considered to be arch rivals, competing for total dominance of the railroad industry. This time, however, karma made sure that Daniel Drew would not escape punishment. Jay Gould and Fisk eventually betrayed Drew by manipulating the prices of Erie stocks in the future. Drew had to file for bankruptcy in 1876.
I declare bankruptcy!
By 1864, Vanderbilt had thoroughly dominated the steamboat industry and decided to focus all his efforts towards his railroad empire. He sold all his steamboats and invested heavily in the railroad. And he was spot on. Sometimes success in business doesn't translate to success in every other part of your life. And while Cornelius's business blossomed, his family life suffered. His wife Sophia often blamed Cornelius for not devoting any time to his family. She was left alone to care for their 13 children. While there was no dearth of wealth at her disposal, she did suffer from a lack of emotional support. Sophia faced a lot of mental health issues later in her life, and Cornelius didn't show any sympathy or care towards her even then. He sent her to an insane asylum. To make matters worse, one of his eldest sons, Billy, had a nervous breakdown when he was young. Vanderbilt considered him weak and unmanly because of his poor mental health, and he shipped Billy off to a farm to recover. His youngest, George Vanderbilt II, a graduate from the United States Military Academy, fell sick and tragically died at a young age, causing the Commodore great sorrow. Billy returned and joined his father's railroad business in the 50s. Even though the Commodore considered him to be a disappointment, Billy proved his worth by stepping up and shouldering the workload in the railroad business. The Commodore was left impressed by his son, and Bill was officially appointed as the operational manager of all his railroad lines. Cornelius also lost his wife, Sophia, in 1868. At this time, he was 60, and he quickly married another cousin of his, Frank Crawford. Not only did he remarry another one of his cousins, but she was 40 years younger than him at the time of their marriage. Before his death, Cornelius Vanderbilt amassed $105 million and had more than 10% of all the currency in circulation in America. In his controversial will, Cornelius gave 90% of his fortune to his son William Henry Vanderbilt, and the remaining 10% went to his wife and the rest of his children. He had a soft spot for William and considered the rest of his children undeserving and weak. Even until his last breath, Cornelius was still as spirited as ever. He got sick, bedridden, and finally died in 1877 after battling from a combination of multiple chronic disorders for a long time. Legend has it that when reporters would crowd around his house to collect information about his deteriorating health, he would chase them off while hurling abuses at them. He had to be physically restrained by his wife. The Vanderbilt name has been immortalized in American history thanks to his $1 million donation to help build the famous Vanderbilt University in Tennessee, Nashville. This was the biggest charitable donation in history till that point in time, and his wife Frank played a major role in convincing him to give back to society. Check out the story of the next big tycoon, Andrew Carnegie. Click here as we reveal why Carnegie was evil.